And just to make sure nothing has changed, you can still see my slide screen. Is that correct?
Yep, correct.
Perfect.
I think we've got about 15 participants already. If everybody who's starting to join in at this time, we'll give it a couple more minutes. Wait till the top of the hour and give it a couple minutes, and we will get started. Okay, I think we're going to get started. I got about a minute or two past the starting time. So I want to, hopefully you can hear us and see the screen. We're very happy to have Rebekah Smith with us today. Rebekah is the founder of Unshakable Direction and the Crisis Leadership Strategist. I'm sorry, Crisis Leadership Strategist who helps project professionals think clearly and lead decisively under pressure. Unlike how I can't speak. Rebekah, we're very happy to have you. Thank you. And I'll let you introduce your topic and your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebekah Smith. And as you were just saying, I'm the founder of Unshakable Direction. And my work focuses on helping organizations maintain clarity and sound decision making when pressure starts distorting interpretation. So much of that work shows up in project environments where visibility, risk, and stakeholder expectations overall, they all converge. So today, I'm going to share a very practical way to recognize when interpretation is drifting and then how to reset that conversation. So just want to make sure that everyone can see my slides. Quick thumbs up. Excellent. Perfect. So I see everyone knows how to use the reactions. Fantastic. We're going to use those in a couple of times today. All right. So before we begin, let me ask a quick question. So raise your hand, again, just using those reactions or your physical hand. Raise your hand if you've ever been in a project meeting where numbers on the screen looked just fine, but the conversation suddenly became tense. All right, now keep your hand up if the issue escalated, even though the data had not actually changed. All right, I still see a few thumbs up here. So that moment happens in just about every organization. The numbers didn't change, but the interpretation did. This is specifically what I call the decision drift. So much of my work focuses on organizations operating under high visibility, right? High pressure environments where small escalation shifts create large operational consequences, right? So today we're going to explore how that shift happens and then again, simply just how to reset it. All right, so inside disruption, clarity becomes important. Clarity actually becomes more important than control, which is actually the opposite of where instincts go, right? We instantly want control. However, clarity becomes more important. So it quietly shifts first when projects come under pressure. So in the chat, take a moment, think about what quietly shifts first when projects come under pressure. Does everyone have access to the, okay, perfect. Domino effect of people's reactions. All right, that's a great one. Any other thoughts on what typically shifts first once projects come under pressure? Timeline, that's a great one as well. Attitudes. We're not going to talk too much about that one. Costs, absolutely, you bet. Stakeholder understanding, priorities, tenseness of meetings, all of these, absolutely. All right, so what I'm seeing everyone put in the chat here, these are all signals that most teams notice, right? But underneath these signals, all of the priority shifts, that people go silent, get defensive, everything that you're saying, underneath these signals, something more subtle is actually shifting. That's actually the interpretation. So decision drift, what shift? That shift is what I call, of course, decision drift. So more reporting, timeliness of meetings, more escalations, communication of changes, more governance, right? But disruption, it's rarely a control problem. It's oftentimes a clarity problem. So when the pressure rises, interpretation slowly begins drifting. And when interpretation starts drifting, the reset we come to use comes from the FOCUS REFRAME System. So this reset we'll explore today comes from the FOCUS and reset system, sort of a condensed version, but we'll talk about that in just a moment here. All right, so for session outcomes, today we're going to focus on 3 practical outcomes: recognizing decision drift, using a simple 3-minute reset when pressure rises, and then leaving with a one-page clarity tool that you can use immediately with any of your teams. So everything today is designed to be practical. Most breakdowns don't begin in execution. I'm sure everyone's very familiar with that. They begin in perception. So oftentimes pressure creates noise, right? Creates a lot of noise. And then leadership requires identifying the signal. So let me give you a quick example. I was looking at a project dashboard with a team where the schedule variance was about 3%, right? Nothing unusual. The project was still well within tolerance. For some reason, the room still felt tense. So I remember one leader looked at the same numbers and said, "We're starting to lose control of this project." Another leader in the same room looked at the same numbers and said, "We just need to adjust sequencing." The data was actually identical, right? But what changed, what was different about the two, was just the interpretation. So, and when pressure rises, interpretation tends to become more reactive, right? I'm sure we've all experienced that when, we start getting more visibility, or maybe a lot of people are looking, or again, just the pressure begins to rise. We have our most human reaction and want to become reactive. Fix the first thing that we see, fix the first thing that might seem loudest, right? But that doesn't actually mean that that's the real issue. All right, so let's pause for a moment. In one word, what does pressure look like in your projects right now? I want you to go ahead and drop those in the chat. Just type one word. What does pressure look like in your projects right now? We don't have to mention any names, right? We're staying safe here. Just what does pressure look like to you? Okay. I'm seeing stressed, emotion, stress a couple times, time, OKRs. You bet. Results, paralysis, misalignment, you bet. Frustration, absolutely. So these are usually what you're seeing here are typically the first signals that interpretation may already be slightly drifting. So let's talk about what that drift actually looks like. Thanks for your responses, everyone. Decision drift is the gradual misalignment between project reality and the leadership interpretation under pressure. So let me read that again. Decision drift is the gradual misalignment between project reality and the leadership interpretation when it comes under pressure, right? The project itself most likely has not changed, but the narrative surrounding the project has. And that narrative begins shaping decisions, right? That's when people start becoming reactive. All right, so I'm going to run a really quick poll. If you wouldn't mind loading that poll, I'm going to put up the next slide here while we get that poll loaded. Thank you so much. All right, so under pressure, what shifts first in your environment? We have stakeholder tone, risk escalation, time defensiveness, and decision avoidance. I'm going to take a moment for everyone just to answer that poll question. Excellent, thank you. So as we can see on these results, stakeholder tone, that's very interesting. That rated first. And then we have timeline defensiveness. And I actually saw that here in the chat as well. Vote number second. And then we have a drop, and then we have the risk escalation and decision avoidance. So notice something important. These are all perception shifts before they become actual performance failures. All right, so let me show you a situation that happens in almost every organization that I've worked with. We have a stable dashboard. We have minor variance. I know we have the slide up on the screen, but what do you think happens next? Well, we see excuses, exactly. Concern about variance and impact. Absolutely. Interpretation changed. Yep. So it sounds like we're seeing leaders escalate publicly, right? We also have, like you said, defensive reporting follows, blaming people instead of the actual issue. You got it. So what we're seeing here are responses and reactions, right? The data, nothing changed in the data. What changed was, again, the interpretation. So let's take that situation even further. So imagine, as I said earlier, imagine two leaders are looking at the exact same dashboard. We take a look at this left column here. So the project health maybe is in the yellow, right? The schedule variance, 4%. Risk count, we've got 12. Scope change is a plus 3%. These numbers they're fairly typical, right, in many projects. So one leader might interpret the data this way, right, where variance is within tolerance. We are experiencing, we are resequencing 2 milestones and maintaining forecast. So that response typically will stabilize a project, right? Then take another leader, looking at the exact same numbers, the exact same dashboard. They can look at it and say, we're experiencing a lot of instability and we need executive intervention ASAP, right? I'm sure all of us have experienced that at least once or something very similar. So that second response, it actually escalates the situation, right? Both leaders see the same data, but what changed, again, was the interpretation. And this is how decision drift begins. All right, so this is a little visual I like to call the distortion chain. So pressure influences perception, right? Perception then influences judgment. Judgment then drives execution, and then execution shapes the stakeholder confidence. So most organizations, they try to fix this at the chain of execution, right? But distortion actually begins a lot earlier, right? It begins at the perception, the engagement moment. Quick show of hands. Where do you see distortion in your projects? I'm going to name off 3. Do you see distortion first in your projects, would you say in perception? How many of you would say that you see it in perception first? You can change your answer, that's okay. See a couple hands. All right, so when you see distortion first, would you say it was Maybe it was in judgment. I'm seeing a few more hands a little bit faster there. Couple hearts, there you go. All right, and then finally, when you see distortion first in your projects, maybe has that looked like, has that shown itself first in execution? Interesting. Okay, so I do see a couple hands. Most teams notice the consequences. They notice them in execution, but the drift again begins much earlier, as you said. All right. So in project environments, this pattern shows up pretty clearly. So risk logs expand without prioritization. Status reports, they become very defensive. Change control becomes reactive. Steering committees, they begin to lose confidence. So when this pattern repeats across projects, this is when it becomes an organizational interpretation problem. So organizations, from what I've seen in my experience, they often respond by tightening control, right? They put in more governance. They add on processes. They add checklists, right? But distortion typically is not, it's not a process problem. Again, it goes back to this being an interpretation problem. Because if distortion begins in interpretation, the reset must also begin where it starts, which is in the interpretation. All right, so once we organize, or that we, I would say, recognize that interpretation is beginning to drift, the first step is to slow the situation down. And this often is the exact opposite of what our human nature is, right? The first thing we want to do typically is jump in, move faster, fix the problem, right? Yep, I see a change perception by improving communication of project status. Thank you. Thank you for that. Oftentimes, everyone wants to just fix the problem or hurry up and quiet the noise, right? But often the best thing we can do is slow the situation down just for a moment. Okay, so what I'm sharing here is a condensed version of the FOCUS REFRAME System. Okay, so in deeper work, we spend a lot more time or more time with it, but these are the top 3 questions that I've extracted that are designed to be used quickly in a real project conversation. Okay, so first we're going to focus. Focus is actually just 3 simple questions. And we can all read them here on the screen. The first one being, what is actually happening? So when we hear there's a disruption, we hear there's a bunch of noise, maybe there's emails sending in and out, project managers, leaders, having other conversations. If we take a moment just to slow down and ask, what is actually happening? And then the second question is, what assumptions are we making? And then the third question is, what is actually within our control? And there's a science behind this, right? This is a physics-based framework here. But these questions help the team shift from reacting to interpreting the situation more clearly? So think about a recent meeting where the conversation escalated. I'm going to give you just a moment to think about a recent escalation. And I want you to, hindsight's 2020, I know, but I want you to think back to that recent escalation. And then I want you to apply these three questions to it. And you can do this side quietly in your own time, but I want you to walk through each of the questions. Is there anyone who did not have a recent escalation pop in their head? I'm going to take that as a no, because I know in all of our environments, I'm sure there's at least one situation that can come to mind. So I want you to just type in the chat if you can. How would the first question alone have changed that discussion? So what actually happened? If we had applied that question to this most recent escalation, how could that have changed the discussion? I see a comment. What are our options to remedy? Having different viewpoints, absolutely. Explain expectations. Let's get the facts before we jump to conclusions. You bet. I think that's a great summary. All right. Analyze the situation and its causes before trying to identify a fix or reaction. You bet. And that's essentially the measures behind this focus and reframe, right? Again, a lot of times our instincts are to jump in. So the reframe, once the team has slowed down with the focus questions, and again, this is a reduced version, but these are the three top questions from the focus and the reframe that address these individual situations. So once the team has slowed down with focus, the next step is to shift the conversation forward because we cannot stay there forever, right? This is where the reframe comes in. So again, this is a condensed version of the focused reframe system that is designed for real project environments. So the reframe now asks three questions. What matters most right now? What decision restores alignment? And then what action stabilizes the next 24 hours? That way, with these three questions, we can address both the short term and the long term, right? But we are taking these three questions and applying them to move the conversation from responsive or reaction to deciding. So think about a recent meeting. It can be the same one, it can be a different one where the discussion Maybe the discussion felt stuck. Going to give you just a moment to think about a meeting, again, where the discussion just felt stuck. So is there anyone who doesn't have that in mind, where you don't have a recent meeting that just comes to mind? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you do. So which one of these questions can be applied? One of these questions often changes the direction of the conversation. These are going to help it move forward. So these questions are ones to try out. I would challenge you in your next escalation or next meeting that might feel stuck. I'm going to give you a handout again with all of these questions and this framework, but I would challenge you just to apply one of these questions and see how the conversation begins to either slow down and evaluate or accelerate the ability to move forward. All right, so let me give you a quick example. I was speaking with a project leader recently whose team believed a delivery milestone had failed, and the conversation had already been escalated. So instead of debating whether the project was failing, the team asked the very first focus question: what is actually happening? So when they reviewed the data carefully, they realized that the schedule variance was small and tied to one dependency. And then they actually ended up asking the second question, which is, what assumptions are we making? And that assumption was that the delay meant the entire milestone was slipping, right? They had that perception because that's how they were interpreting it. But if you looked at the data, it wasn't. So just asking those two questions slowed the reaction and clarified the situation. Sometimes when we slow the reaction and clarify the situation, it will help us avoid becoming reactionary, right? And then putting into motion a ton of other things that can derail our focus. So once clarity returns, the next step is to move the conversation forward, which is where the reframe comes in, right? What matters most right now? What decision restores alignment? And then what stabilizes the next 24 hours? All right, so the pattern, this pattern appears frequently in governance conversations, right? So steering committees, tension, risk escalation, executive reviews. You cannot out-execute distorted judgment. And I think everyone has experienced that at least once or twice, right? Everyone here and everyone on our teams are highly skilled, highly educated, highly experienced, right? The question isn't if these teams are capable or even prepared. But if one judgment becomes distorted, then it can knock off the entire project, the entire timeline. So we must correct that interpretation first. So these signals indicate decision drift, that it might already be happening within the project or within the scope, right? So here are a couple of early warning signals. And as I read these off, feel free to drop in the chat if you recognize any of these early warning signals, or if any other early warning signals come to mind, right? So if we're going to read them, the status becomes reputation management. Risks escalate without prioritization. I think we've all had that experience. Meetings increase, but clarity decreases. Timeline compression overrides sequencing logic. This one is oftentimes where you'll see in a meeting that maybe someone has said something and the room becomes quiet. That's not necessarily because everyone agrees, right? Maybe everyone sees that the sequencing logic isn't quite there, but no one wants to bring that up in the meeting. Another signal is when several of these all appear together, right? That's when we need to pause and reset. So the decision drift reset card, I actually condensed the reset process into a one-page tool. You can run this by, you can run this reset in less than 3 minutes during a meeting. These include all of the questions. Hurry up, looking at the chat here, hurry up and execute the fix. Typically makes it worse, you bet. Absolutely. And so if these signals ever come up, you can, I'll share the decision drift reset card. You can use this in a meeting. It takes under just a few minutes. You can use it before a status review, a steering committee conversation, or even an escalation call, right? When oftentimes everybody says, let's just get everybody on a call. That's when you know something is up. And so this can help you walk through this before then. I'm reading in the chat here, I'm on a project that is so toxic, a reset card would be great to have. And it's quite amazing. Sometimes, even if we are not the ones running the meetings, asking the right question can have so much effect and literally change the trajectory of a project. So absolutely. I am dropping this in the chat right now. All right, so as you're taking a look at, oftentimes if someone drops something in the chat or puts something in front of me, I have to take a moment to look at it. So I'm going to pause here for just a second and maybe think about, maybe think about a project or a conversation that you're going to have this week. That this might be helpful, might be useful. You don't see the card. Fantastic, thank you. I just uploaded it to the chat.
Oh,
It should say decision drift reset card.
just a second, Rebekah. It looks like you uploaded it just to host and panelists. Let me help you out.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It would be helpful if you could see the card, right?
Yeah. Let's see. There we go.
I appreciate you. Thanks for letting us know. Okay, so I'll take a moment, stop again, and just think about, as you're taking a look at it, opening it, quick viewing it, think about a project conversation that might come up this week or that you're planning to have this week, where this might be helpful or might be useful. Take a drink of water for a moment. All right, let's pull everybody back in. Still not seeing the card. Michelle, you're in the chat. It says that it was shared to everyone. Let me see. I'm going to try this one more time. And now that I figured out how to use Zoom, I shared it to everyone. So Michelle, let's see if you can see that now. It worked for you, Shane? Perfect. You too, Benjamin? Awesome. All right, so let me know if anyone still cannot access it. Thank you, Maya. Okay, so here is just the key insight. If you are seeing recurring misalignment across projects, it's often not a governance gap. I'm gonna let that sit for a moment. It's very often an interpretation gap. So when interpretations drift across multiple projects, it ends up becoming an organizational pattern. And that's what we are trying to avoid, or start to drift in a better direction by asking some of these questions. As we covered today, pressure distorts perception, and clarity restores alignment. Projects rarely fail suddenly, right? They fail slowly in perception before they fail visibly in performance. So I'm going to say that again. Projects often fail slowly in perception long before they fail visibly in performance. So before we wrap up, think about one meeting this week where a clearer interpretation could change the entire conversation. So if you'd like to explore how that might be showing up, you see in your project lessons learned, can you find some process things that can help minimize? We're gonna go to Q&A here in just a moment. So if you'd like to explore how this might be showing up inside your PMO or leadership teams, just feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or my email. I'm always happy to continue that conversation. And I just want to thank you for today's conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with the PMI Western Idaho community. And I look forward to hearing conversations on clarity in your conversations. So I'm going to open this up now to any questions and comments. Yep, and just to follow up in the chat, it just says to raise your hand to unmute and you will be able to chat.
Well, one other thing before we have any questions, just to remind everybody that if you do have your PMP or other certifications, this Lunch and Learn webinar counts for your PDU.
So back to the question of, if you have a issue that keeps popping up on every project, maybe there's something in the way that the project's being managed. So when you're doing a postmortem, your lessons learned on the project, maybe there's something structurally that you could change that would net a different result. And of course, managing expectations is always a challenge. So changing your communication plan so that you can maybe head some of those things off. What do you think about those ideas, Rebekah?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that's where the reset questions really become helpful. Because if you're seeing this, or if this is showing up in multiple projects, that is where before deciding what to do, because it sounds like people are taking actions and this is continually showing up. So before deciding what to do, we slow the conversation down with focus. So if it's consistently showing up across projects, it often indicates an interpretation gap at the organizational level. So that's a great question. And oftentimes when you see this, right, it often feels like an execution issue. But what we frequently see is that it's interpretation drifting under pressure, and that's what steers all the decisions, right? So that's why slowing the first step down during the conversation, maybe with the focus questions or something similar. What's actually happening? What assumptions are we making? And then once the situation is clearer, that next step is reframing the decision. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think the tendency is for people to get emotional right away. And, I like to use the 5-10 year rule that in 5 to 10 years, will anybody care about this? Probably not. So why are we getting all wound up about it now? Let's just use all of our combined intelligence and try to solve the issue. It's hard to keep that emotion out of it, though.
You bet, especially when pressure increases. That's one of the first things we see, right? And we have that in the chat responses as well. Emotion is the first thing to skyrocket, right? Everyone becomes defensive, everyone becomes worried, right? Or not everyone, but many times. So we may not be able to change that pressure in the system, but what you can influence is a conversation, right? How the situation is interpreted, maybe by asking some very simple questions, which can shift the conversation, maybe from, right, instead of getting emotional or letting the emotions run the conversation, run the questions, run the reactions, right? We stop and say, wait, I know we feel this way. This is what it looks like. This is what everyone's saying. Here's what the noise looks like, sounds like. What actually changed? And that can help shift the conversation back to the data.
Yeah, it's moving people away from, who's to blame for this issue to what is it that we're trying to solve?
You bet. So I'm seeing in the chat, can I share the decision panel again? Are you asking for the one sheet?
Yeah, I think that might be your slide 18, I think.
I just shared it. Let's see, I shared it with everyone this time again. Let me know if I didn't share if you were looking for something else. So I'm seeing, yes, currently in one of our projects, we are seeing a high level of assumptions in roles, absolutely, and responsibility, resulting in the loss of valuable time and increase in finger pointing. I feel like in the world of Zoom, it's easier for folks to lose their cool more so than in person. If possible, in-person meetings can resolve a lot of those issues. That's an interesting observation. I think sometimes people are still speaking to another human being, but people can tend to act differently when they're not directly in front of a person, physically. In terms of seeing the high level of assumptions and roles and responsibilities resulting in the loss of valuable time and finger pointing, that's a conversation. Those are conversations and results that come out of emotional conversations when they're not focused on what actually is happening, right? What changed? And then what are the specific things that we need to work on to improve this or to move this project forward? Any other questions or comments? All right, I will pass it back on to the host, and I appreciate everyone for your time and hope that the decision drift reset card and questions can help clarify a conversation or two this next week and in the future moving forward.
All right. Thank you very much, Rebekah. Very, very informative here. And just to let everybody know that's on the call, just a reminder that our professional development day is coming up for next month, April 10th. So if you're local here in the Boise area, then be sure to go to our website, pmiwic.org, and you can register to join our wonderful annual professional development day at the Boise State University. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.